So Professor Hart, thank you very much for joining us, and congratulations on a very well-deserved Nobel Prize.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Okay, so today I want to talk to you about a few topics. We'll start with contracts, the theory of the firm, market, privatization. I'll start with contracts. So the contract theory is probably your main contribution to our understanding of the world. Can you share with us how did this interest in contract theory developed, and how did your journey developed during the last few decades, and explain to us what is it that we know today about contracts' role in the economy and the society that we had less understanding 30 years ago, 40 years ago?
Wow, well, those are big questions. My interest developed over time. I didn't start off in being interested in contracts. I started off as a general equilibrium theorist, but I was interested in incomplete markets, and I got interested in what firms should be maximizing in an economy where you don't have a complete set of futures markets. What is the generalization of profit maximization in a world of uncertainty, and what happens if different owners of the firm disagree about what the firm should do. Over time, that sort of evolved into an interest in conflicts between managers and shareholders rather than between different shareholders, because I began to realize that that was more important. And sort of the next step was to look at that sort of in detail. And the natural way to do that was to consider a contract between the manager and the shareholders. So I started working with Sanford Grossman on that, and I mean, we weren't the first. There was a literature. This is the principal agent literature, which was about the optimal arrangements between the principal, here the shareholders, and the agent, here the manager. But you know, that also evolved. Sandy and I began to realize that another important aspect of that, well, actually, I was going to say, so that was already contracts, but then the next step was incomplete contracts. So what happens when you can't write a contract with your agent which anticipates all future events? But actually, the way we came at that was not through considering the manager and the shareholders, but rather we sort of started our, we became interested in a separate topic, and then that led us to this. The separate topic was also a topic that had been studied a lot already, and this one was what's the difference between a transaction inside a firm and a transaction between two different firms. And again, so there you have to think contractually. The transaction between two different firms is naturally regulated through a contract that the two firms devise. Is a transaction within a firm also a contractual transaction? Well, it seems to be in some sense. You have an employer and an employee, they have a contract. So what's the difference? And we realized at some point in 1983 that the difference was what happens given that the contract is incomplete. Who has residual control or residual decision rights? So anyway, it was a sort of evolution which led me to this. Okay. And then I did later, I just to say, my two chief collaborators in this endeavor have been Sandy Grossman first and then John Moore second.
So what is it? Repeat.
Yes. What do we know? What do we know now? Well, yeah. Well, it's really for other people. Yeah. I mean, there are lots of people who've worked in this area, not just me, and also Bengt Holmstrom, my co-laureate, has continue to work on the principal agent problem and different extensions of that, not incomplete contracts. So we could ask, what do we learn from his work? But that would take us some time. But perhaps you're talking about what have we learned from sort of my approach. And I would say, I think the principal thing is we've learned the importance of control. So, you know, other people who'd studied, thought about the firm and what's different about within the firm transactions and from between the firm transactions, like Ronald Coase and Oliver Williams and Klein Crawford and Alchon and people like that, they had talked about authority. So the idea that an employer can tell an employee what to do, as opposed to having to negotiate with the employee, which is what happens between firms. It's a negotiation rather than authority. But I think what Sandy, John, and I have added to the mix is the idea of control over non-human assets, so ownership and control. So the idea is that when firm A buys firm B and turns the inter-firm transaction into an intra-firm transaction, that a key thing that's changing is that firm A acquires control over firm B's physical and other non-human assets. So forget about the people and don't think in terms of being able to tell them what to do. I'm not saying that isn't an issue, but we focused on a different aspect of it, which is that if I'm firm A, I'm acquiring control over all the non-human assets that firm B had, which might be machines, land, buildings, but also sort of less physical things like patents, copyrights, existing contracts that the firm B had with other firms, the name of firm B, all sorts of things like that. And to the extent that the initial contract was incomplete, and will always be, whatever contract we write will be incomplete, that owning those things now means that I can get to decide how they are used to the extent that the contract was silent about that. Whereas previously, it was the owner of firm B, that wasn't me, who had those rights. So that's a real change. And that we would argue is one of the key reasons that firm A is acquiring firm B. It's to get those residual control rights.
Okay, this is, you didn't mention it, but this is where the question or the idea of bargaining power goes into can you elaborate, and why is bargaining power so important to understand the way the contract and when firms choose to own the assets or just use the market?
Yes, well, so we focused on the idea that you can always think of it as a bargaining situation, and it's kind of useful to do that. So let me give you, so if you and I were dealing with each other, and let's suppose there was some, I'm going to give the example I often give. So let's suppose I'm an electricity company, a power company, and you're a coal mine. And I want to use your coal to burn to make electricity, okay? The most interesting scenario is one where I've actually located my electricity plant right next to you, and this happens in practice, in order to save on transportation costs of the coal, okay? So let's consider two cases. One is where you're a separate company, and now something comes up which wasn't anticipated in the contract between us. Let's say I needed a different type of coal. Okay, so I would come and we would negotiate about this. We'd renegotiate the contract. But the threat point in this case is if you own the coal mine, you can always say no. And so I'm going to have to pay you quite a bit, possibly, in order to persuade you to change the coal. Now consider the case where I bought your mine earlier on, so it's my mine, and now you're simply the manager of the mine. Okay, so same situation, I want a different kind of coal. Well, if you, for some reason, and this may seem a bit far-fetched, but suppose you didn't really want to change the coal, okay, your bargaining position would be quite weak now, because I can always replace you with some other manager who presumably I can find one who's willing to do what I want. And so you can't really I mean, you might, if your human capital is, if I really want to keep you on as the manager because you're a really good manager, you might have a little bit of bargaining power, and I might have to, I mean, let's suppose mining this different coal was kind of unpleasant for you for some reason. So I might have to pay you a bit to get you to do it, and that might be better for me than replacing you. But replacement is always a pretty powerful threat point, much more powerful than the threat point in the case where the mine is yours. Then my next best alternative is to go and ship the coal in from somewhere else, which could be extremely expensive. So you have much more leverage in that case. So in my work, most of my work, not all of it, but certainly the main stuff, this is what actually drives things, that we're going to be bargaining in all cases, but our threat points will be very different depending on who owns the mine, or more generally, who owns which asset.
So we tend to think that markets are usually the best way to allocate resources, but when we look at the world, we tend to forget that a large part of the economic activity is actually done by companies, and today we have very, very large companies that are like small countries of command and control structure. Why is it that so much activity is done in those command and control small countries, huge corporations, and not in markets?
Well, I think, I think the work on the firm, starting with Coase, continuing with Williamson, continuing with my work with co-authors, that has shed some light on it, but I wouldn't say, and I'll tell you what, I'll tell you what I think those theories say in a minute, but I'm not sure I can say, oh yeah, that explains why we have these giant companies. I mean, sometimes these companies seem incredibly large, and you read about a merger of AT&T and Time Warner, is that really a good thing? Is it necessary on efficiency grounds? I have no idea, because I don't know enough about the particular case, but they seem like giants, and maybe there are other reasons they're doing it than pure economic ones. But anyway, the point is, I think I would say, using my own work, that, well, I would say two things. First of all, the sort of classic market economy is one, the way economists used to think about it. I mean, that's one that applies when there really aren't frictions. That is, there aren't lock-in effects. So I can trade with you today and someone else tomorrow. There's nothing special about our relationship. So this applies to quite a few transactions. If I buy shares on the stock market from you, there's nothing special about you. If I go back into the market and want to buy some more shares, I'll be buying them from somebody else. These are sort of anonymous trades, and in this kind of situation, a standard market setting is the natural way to carry out the transaction. But then there are other cases, like the electricity company in the coal mine, where the electricity company is actually locating a plant next to the coal mine. Once it's done that, it wants to deal with that coal mine. We've turned something which might have been frictionless ex ante into a situation ex post, where the costs of going somewhere else are very great. It's not at all like me buying from you and then buying from shares from you or somebody else. Then there are no costs at all of switching partners in that sort of situation, whereas there are huge costs in the electricity coal situation. And there are many cases in between. I mean, you think of a worker who works for a firm, They get a job, they had to search, both parties had to search, they had to figure out whether there was a good match. Now that they've decided there is a good match, they're going to be costs for each party if they switch partners. So it's whenever you have situations like that where they're switching costs, contracts become important. And so we have to recognize that the classical market view is actually quite a special one about it. There are many other ways that transactions take place.
So how do we explain, using your theory, the outcomes that we see in markets, in the private market, and in the public markets when looking at your ideas?
Okay, so I think one has to think about it the same way. We're talking about a situation where the government is going to pay for a service, and it's not difficult to understand from an economic point of view why that might be the case. I mean, there are economists have long talked about public goods, and these things will not be financed at an efficient level just through laissez-faire. We're going to have a government who's going to come in and finance them. But it doesn't follow from that the government actually has to produce them. The government can pay for them, but could get a private company to actually produce them. So in my work with Andrei Schleifer and Rob Vishny, we picked an example. It wasn't the only example we talked about, but the one we focused on was prisons. So it's very obvious, I think, that the market is not going to pay for prisons, because having people incarcerated is something that lots of people benefit from. So it's a classic, it's a public good, they're free rider problem. So the government will be the party that will finance a prison. But should it run the prison itself? So should the prison be a government-run operation where the people in the prison are employees? Or should the government write a contract with a private company to run the prison? And so that choice is very similar conceptually to should the electricity company contract with the coal mine for coal, or should it buy the coal mine and turn it into an intra-firm transaction? Conceptually, it's the same. So you can use the same ideas to analyze the trade-off.
And in the prison's case, your theory will hint or tell us actually that usually prisons are not should be run and be owned and run by the government, not only, and you cannot outsource it to the private market.
Actually, we had a slightly more nuanced answer. I think we argued that one difficulty in writing a good contract, because actually, if you look at the contracts, so we did in this paper talk about the contracts that are actually written, and they're quite elaborate between a government and a private contractor to run a prison. They're quite elaborate, but we argued that there are some things it's difficult to specify in the contract, and one is the quality of the guards. And so we argued that the private company might have an incentive to hire lower quality, cheaper, less well-trained guards, and yet still be within the contract. So this would be an example of, well, if you could write a perfect contract, this wouldn't be an issue, because you could specify exactly the type of training the guards should receive. But we argued that, in fact, that was difficult to do, and so there was a kind of gap there, which a private contractor could take advantage of. And then we went on to consider, well, when is it going to be a serious problem to have these lower quality guards? And we argued that this was going to be the case more with high security prisons. I mean, the most dangerous prisoners. So those prisons, we argued, because this could be an issue, the case for public ownership was quite strong. But with lower security prisons, with lower security, less dangerous prisoners, it was going to be less of a problem. So their private outcome might not be bad.
So privatization is a very contentious issue in the right and in the left. Let me ask you that. So you have a very, I would say, clean and simple model on what can be outsourced and what can be privatized that is much based on the idea of what can we monitor, what can we enforce, what can we design in contracts. But do you
Yeah.
think that those are really the most only important issues or the most important issues? Or actually one of there are other factors like corruption, culture, civic capital. You know, you have countries where you see that people that inside the government or outside government have different way of behaviors. So is this a complete theory does the contract theory help us a lot here, or sheds only some light on those questions?
Well, that's an excellent question, and I'm not sure I know the answer to it. I mean, I think this approach is helpful. Yes, I never think that economics provides the full answer to almost anything, actually. I think this is one of the mistakes people make about economics, and this is why they're often disappointed. You know, why can't economists predict the Great Recession? Why didn't they? You know, and that's, I think, misunderstanding what economics is about. Economics is a helpful tool, but it's not the, you know, there are many, many problems or questions where having economists give their views on what should be done is going to be extremely helpful, but it doesn't mean you only want to listen to them. So that's my general view, and that may be true here. I do think, though, that where this is useful is that a lot of, as you said, a lot of this private-public ownership discussion is almost entirely political. That is, there are going to be people on the left who think that it's outrageous to do these things through a private contractor because they think private is bad. Anyone who makes money, you know, profits are bad, and so it's just they think almost. Well, you know, the extreme case we have socialists or communists or whatever who think everything should be run by the government. Okay. On the other hand, you have people on the right who think all government, all government is bad. Government's bad, so the government shouldn't be running anything. Well, I think both of them are wrong. The truth is somewhere in the middle, and I think this approach is helpful to tell us, you know, where it should be, you know, in a particular situation. It's a useful framework because what it says is we can just think about what are we trying to achieve here, and what's the best way to achieve it. And sometimes private is good because actually having people pursue profit gives them good incentives to be efficient and to reduce costs, and that actually can often be a good thing for everybody. It can also give them the incentives to innovate, and those are also good, but it can also sometimes have them reduce costs in socially undesirable ways, and that can be bad. So it's a trade-off. So I think this is a useful perspective, but I don't deny that sometimes other things are important.
Can we say that your contract theory did predict that prisons are not to be owned by the private market? Well, because this is what happened.
Well, this has happened, yeah. I mean, I even read an article in a newspaper, a very good newspaper, which suggested that this paper with Schleifer and Vishny was responsible for what happened, which was news to me. I'd be happy to, in a way, to think that was true, but I didn't realize I had that much influence until I read that. But yes, I think it could be said that we anticipated some of the problems.
So how would your framework about contracts and there specifically about the enforceability and the monitoring of contracts deal with the fact that we know that in the world there are always many times when we look at a contract, we have on the one hand what public choice people would say concentrated interest, and on the other side we have dispersed. We can have dispersed consumers, dispersed investors, dispersed taxpayers, and of course we know that the ability of the concentrated to monitor and sometimes to enforce is much better. So how does your contract theory help us understand the implication of that to the way the economy works.
By the way, let me just, I realized there was one thing you said which I didn't respond to, and I should, which is the corruption issue. You mentioned that. Actually, in our paper, this prisons paper, we do talk about corruption and how that might shift the balance one way or the other. So,
how, by the way?
Well, now you ask me. I think one of the
because
things,
some people say
one of the things,
corruption, let's go and privatize. Some people say corruption, let's go and have it owned by the government. Can you have a more nuanced
yes,
answer
we did have a more nuanced answer, and the question is, can I remember it? I think we said that sometimes if you privatize things, but there's corruption there, you might end up selling to the wrong person at a low price, because there's some kickback. The auction is rigged in some way, and this could be a serious issue in some contexts, and that might push you towards not going with a private contract. I mean, more generally, the private contractor could get a very sweet deal. And if you keep it in the hands of the government, you're going to avoid that problem. But then there are other forms of corruption which go the other way, where having it in government hands means that you can have a lot of patronage and people, being employed in the prison to get votes and this kind of thing, and a lot of inefficiency that way. So again, it's not a simple answer, unfortunately, but life is not simple.
So basically, maybe this is where the idea of civic capital, social capital, norms in society
absolutely.
play out.
Absolutely, in some, yes.
Tremendously.
Yes.
So let me repeat my questions.
The question about
so we talked about that in most contracts, in many contracts, to be more precise, on one hand, we have concentrated interest. On the other hand, we have the dispersed. So how would that play out in your
I would say it hasn't played out very well so far. I would say that's a gap in the theory, and I'll tell you why. According to classical theory, and that's even true of contract theory, if I'm a big company and you're a little consumer, and let's say I have the bargaining power. So if I set the terms of the contract. The implication of that is that you won't do very well. I will, though, to use economics jargon, I will extract most of the surplus from the transaction, but I should still have an incentive to do something very efficient. In other words, to take a concrete example, suppose we're talking about a product and the question is, should there be a warranty for it? Well, even though I have all the power in the relationship in terms of having all the bargaining power, if a warranty makes sense on efficiency grounds, I should offer you the warranty, I should include it, but I would simply charge you a lot for it. So if warranties are efficient, they will be offered, and the only thing that will be different because I have a lot of power is that the price will be different. Okay.
Or you offer me a warranty, and when the time comes, it will be difficult for me to enforce that warranty.
Okay.
Because there are going to be
well, that's
caveats.
a good point. All right, so maybe that's the. Let me just say that I think in reality, sometimes I won't offer you the warranty, and maybe the reason is that if I did offer it to you, the price for that, or more generally the price for the product, would be so high that it would look bad or something, and so instead I keep the price lower and I simply shade on the quality, that is, I don't offer you. And so we actually get an inefficiency. But that's something that's outside the scope of standard theory, because it would have to do with perhaps psychology and so on, how you would react to a very high price or something like that. Now, the other thing, though, that you mentioned, yes, that's important, which is if we have a dispute, what happens? Well, that gets into the legal system and how it functions and whether there are ways around that. In principle, the legal system could be set up in such a way that a little guy, in fact, we do have a bit of this with class action suits and so on. There's some attempt to provide you with a way to actually fight me And another way would be, you could, if you sue and you're successful, maybe the damages would be very great. We could even, by the way, write that into the contract. If you're worried ahead of time, when I sell the product to you, that, okay, it comes with a warranty, but you're never going to be able to enforce it because I have lots of lawyers working for me. We could have actually written into the contract that we could write that you could sue, and if successful, I pay your damages. That could be, I pay your legal fees. That could be part of our contract. We could agree that if you're successful, given that you have to fight an army of lawyers, then the damages I will agree to pay are enormous to compensate you for that. So these are things which actually, in a way, a contract could deal with. So then the question is, why don't we see that? I don't think we see very much of that. And I'm afraid, again, it may come back to some psychological issues or something. I would say I don't have very good answers to those questions.
Okay.
They're important questions.
So for many years, the top of the agenda when we talked about economics was productivity, growth, and taxes, big government, small government. And in the last few years, on top of the agenda is inequality, even on the right side of the aisle, not only the. Do you think that inequality is, as an economist, do you think that inequality is something to be left to politicians, or it's also very important for economists?
Oh, I think it's important for economists too, because there's a very well-developed branch of economics called welfare economics, where people spend a lot of time thinking about, why we need taxes and what are their, what's their purpose? And one of the purposes is to redistribute income. And I think many economists think that some income redistribution is good. At one extreme, you would have people on the right who think that that you shouldn't go any further than providing a safety net for the very poor. So you just want to have a sort of floor that people don't fall below, but that's it. We don't worry about inequality beyond that. And then you will have people on the left who say, oh, we're very concerned about the rich not being too rich and that sort of thing. And I'm not sure, I'm not sure where I fall on that spectrum, but that is certainly a debate within welfare economics. Utilitarians would think that there's a big role for doing more than providing the safety net. And actually, if you look at the optimal income taxation literature, starting with Jim Mirrlees' work, that also, that puts everybody behind the veil of ignorance. It sort of says, let's imagine we were designing an optimal tax subsidy scheme before we know who we are going to be, whether you're going to be very talented or very untalented. Okay, what's the optimal arrangement in that situation? And that's going to involve some concern with not having too much inequality.
Yeah, and probably if we are behind this veil of ignorance, the arrangements that we'll see in our world are going to be pretty different than the world we live today.
Yes, although I'm not sure. I'm not an expert on that area at all, but I don't think you get extremely progressive tax rates out of that, actually. Yeah. But let me say, from my point of view, I think tax rates in this country are too low. I would be in favor of raising tax rates for the rich.
You mean taxes on income. Personal income?
Yeah. But I would also be in favor of cleaning up. As everybody says, the system is mind-bogglingly complicated with all sorts of special provisions and so on. And it would be wonderful to clean that up. But of course, every time it gets cleaned up, then it gets dirty again.
You spend a lot of time understanding why firms are the way they are and why they're so important. And one of your students that you advise on his PhD, Professor Luigi Zingalef, he thinks that we have to reconsider the theory of the firm because we see that is many cases, it is the large firms and other special interest groups that actually design the rules of the game. Do you agree?
I think it's very possible, and I think it's a very important extension. I mean, it's not part of my work, but I think when we go and look at the world, it seems it's plausible that it's a part of what's going on out there. And so, you know, I never felt my work was the full story. And I think the fact that these political elements which are important is not only important, but intellectually very interesting. And the fact that you might have a merger because not for efficiency reasons at all, not for empire building, not because the manager just wants to control more, but because the bigger firm will have an opportunity to get the rules changed in Washington or wherever else. I mean, this is a new element, a new part of the story, and an interesting and important part. So I don't know much about it, but I follow Luigi's work in this area with interest.
All right. Oliver, thank you very much.
Thank you, Guy.